Many people in Britain believe that for them the European project is somehow different. They expressed that difference by voting in large numbers for the anti-EU movement, the UK Independence Party, or UKIP for short. However, one very interesting phenomenon in that election in May 2014 suggests that the UK is actually thinking rather the same things as the rest of the EU. Across Europe, millions of people, most of whom have never even visited the United Kingdom, did exactly the same thing. They also voted against Europe, most notably in Britain's neighbouring country, France, where the anti-EU party, the National Front, stormed ahead in the elections. From Manchester to Madrid and from Berlin to Brussels, and regardless of whether the member state is in or out of the Eurozone, this year's European elections were an unplanned rebellion against national governments and a direct and aggressive challenge to the EU's future. So how unexpected was the public revolt against the European project? Why are so many people unhappy with the politicians in charge of the continent? And who's to blame for the remarkable rise in the anti-EU movement? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. We began by asking the public if they were surprised by the results in May 2014. Here's what they said. What, if anything, surprised you most about the recent European election results?
I don't think anything did surprise me, actually. I think the press got it right, or the general feeling was right. UKIP was going to do what it was going to do. I wasn't really as au fait as I should have been as to what was happening in Europe, but just concentrating on the UK, UKIP was destined to sort of make a point.
Not a great deal, I have to say. I thought they were fairly predictable.
I'm not really happy of what has happened in France, personally, because you've got two main things. The first one is the extremist party would take 25% of the votes, and 60% of the French are not interested in Europe. And this is what you can see everywhere in Europe, so I think there is a big problem of communication from Europe to the citizens.
What, if anything, surprised you most about the European election results recently?
Well, to be honest, the thing that surprised me was how gullible people are, and how they think that these people who, you know, UKIP, can actually make anything different to how it's going to be anyway.
I'm Australian, so I really can't comment. We sort of come from a democracy where if once the electors are elected, or the leaders are elected, it makes life pretty easy. They make the decisions for us, and we kind of stand up occasionally, but not too much. I've seen some of the writing and things on the news through some of the services, but being in a different language, it makes it pretty hard to sort of understand. And being from Australia and the other side of the world, it's pretty hard to even comprehend what's going on over here at the same time. So
I think Europe is not going the way it should go. I think there are really good things about Europe, but Europe hasn't been good to communicate around that, and so people just end up voting against it, which is a shame, I think, for me and young people.
So those are the views of the public. But what's the expert view on whether this set of results in the European elections was a surprise or whether it could be predicted?
The thing that surprised me most was the extent of the disconnect between the political establishment and a large section of the voters. I was really surprised, particularly following the expenses scandal several years ago now, that the political establishment still isn't in touch with what ordinary people think about really big issues like immigration in the UK.
The most surprising thing was the size and the heavy weight and the velocity as well of the change towards the right-wing parties. That was not expected to happen in 10 or 20 years time, so let alone it all happens in a matter of weeks. That was very, very shocking, really. And as many of the parties which have won recently in such a way are a one-man party or one policy party, that is rather upsetting as well, because if you look at UKIP, its only policy or objective is to limit immigration, and we can only see one man, which everybody knows, but almost nobody knows the second man in the party. So if anything happens to that gentleman, God knows what's going to happen to that party.
British Prime Minister David Cameron once referred to UKIP members as fruitcakes, loonies and closet racists. To what extent does that reflect the public's view of that political party? Here's what they said. UK leader David Cameron once called members of the UK Independence Party fruitcakes, loonies and closet racists. How in touch do you think he is with the public's mood?
I think he's a bit out of touch, actually. I think there's a general feeling that they are not being represented by the official parties, and therefore, fruitcakes or not, they will go to somebody that seems to listen to what they're saying.
That's a good question. I think Nigel Farage and the UKIP party represent a growing body of disenfranchised and marginalised British voters. I don't think that necessarily people in power have been trying to communicate and have a discussion with the UKIP party just because some of their ideas seem so offensive.
I think that kind of statement's not particularly helpful because I think it just sort of suggests they're beyond the pale. So I don't think that actually addresses, you know, the reality of the concerns of a lot of English people, British people. And, you know, those are the concerns that need addressing. And it's no coincidence that it's London where they've done least well, because London is the most multicultural place in the whole of the UK, where it works, by and large, and where the struggles go on, but people are real. Whereas I think a lot of UKIP are picking up votes in really quite areas with a lot of problems, and so the migrant then becomes a scapegoat, you know, but they need to address those real problems rather than, you know, write them off as loonies. That doesn't help anybody, really.
I think that sort of language is not really helpful, and I think that's just going to be more inflammatory and kind of really divisive, and maybe he needs to tune in a little bit more about the general public mood that surrounds the reasons why they've elected UKIP as a member in European Union.
So a rather different take on UKIP by the British public compared to the British Prime Minister. We asked our experts to what extent UKIP can be taken as a serious political movement. Here's what they said.
There's two parts to this, really. Remember that David Cameron professionally, his background is a public relations person. So this is spin. He wanted to put people off voting for UKIP, and that's one of the tactical measures he's taken to denigrate UKIP. As far as Clegg's concerned, he hasn't been quite so vituperative, but it's fair to say that he has also been very dismissive and very negative. But these are tactics by leading members of the political establishment to try and discredit a fringe party that's taking away some of their vote.
That is all childish and is counterproductive. But their policies is out of touch. The main problem the people have now, almost globally, probably in America, things would be similar if the United States were not that strongly bonded. But if they were as loose as the states of the European Union, then they would have been in serious trouble, as well as we see in Britain. I think politics has been tarnished all over the world. There is no real democracy. There is no real interest in the people's needs and the interests, but it's established one establishment which is dictating its views and interests on everybody else.
In the European Union, right-wing groups, terrorism and racist attacks seem to be on the increase. Who's to blame? What's driving this? We asked the public for their views. In the European Union, generally, right-wing groups and terrorism and racist attacks seem to be rising. What do you think's behind that? What's causing that?
I think there's just a body of people behind there, like all parts, even football hooligans. There's always somebody ready to stir up a bit of trouble behind the scenes. I don't know why it is, but people seem to get their kicks out of it, and they should just read the manifestos of everybody and find out what they like and just stick to that.
I think that Europe is a great struggle, but I think that it's a great model, and I hope that it perseveres. And I think obviously some local leaders play on that for populist votes, but I don't think that's the way to go.
I think the people have got to take responsibility. The people are the ones electing them in, and I kind of feel that the UKIP vote was a protest vote by the people saying we're not happy with the current people being put forward by these parties. And, you know, if they're going to implement those policies, then it's up to the people to come up and to say no, and it's the people to stop those things. There's only so much you can blame a government for before taking responsibility for yourself.
Look, there'd have to be some part blame put on the leaders. You know, we come from a pretty cohesive society in Australia, and you know, all the groups tend to get along. If it doesn't, we talk about the problem, solve it, and move on. We've had the problem with the Indigenous people over there in Australia for a long time, and we're finally making inroads into it and getting along and moving along. There was an apology that our Prime Minister made, going back 3 or 4 years ago, it might even be a little bit longer, that started those wheels turning, and it's now being spoken about, and the groups are coming closer and closer together. So if something like that could happen over here, I'm sure it'd be a great benefit.
So what is driving the growth of right-wing movements, of terrorism and racist attacks in the European Union? We asked our experts.
There's 2 key factors here. The first is economic insecurity. So it's always been the case in Europe, in the modern era, that when people are worried about their financial security and about their work, there tends to be a rise in the popularity of the far right. So that's one very important factor. The other important factor is that fascism in Europe never really goes away. So far right parties might lose support for a little while, but then they have a resurgence. It seems to be a cyclical process, but the far right, the fascists, are never very far from surges in popularity, and clearly that's happening again at the moment.
If you talk about violence, racism and terrorism, I think in my own heart that these matters have been abused by the political establishments and by the media for just the sake of their own interests and excitement and attracting viewers and readers. The main problem is the lack of democracy. If there is true democracy, if there is proper economic policies which look after the real interests of the people and the nation as a whole, then you will see a lot less violence, for example. And terrorism, it is just violent moves or movements which have increased, and they were boosted by the media and used by some political parties, and it just got where it is now because it was let go. Unlike violence, for example. Here you saw in Great Britain, when violence took place in Tottenham or anywhere else, it was clamped down straight away, in no time. But when you had, say, radical Islam led by some unqualified clerics taking place in Britain, it was encouraged, it was glorified. And after that, you can't say terrorism, cry foul again, or cry wolf. We created that. And we should really blame ourselves for letting that take place. So it is a matter of really freedom, proper democracy, and economic justice.
A basic building block of the European Union is its economy. But with financial instability affecting so many EU states, we wondered what the public thought the future holds for the European Union. A basic building block of the EU is the economy, but with a lot of financial instability in some states in the EU, perhaps that's going to have an effect on where the EU goes as well. What's your opinion?
I don't know. I haven't really got an opinion on the EU, just that we need to sort this one out because there's a lot of shenanigans going on in Brussels, I'm sure. People are getting money for old rope there, and we need to look into that a bit, and I think Cameron's right that we should sort that one out.
Well, if you like, we've got the same problem regionally here. We've got parts of the country that are poorer than others, parts that have got higher unemployment and all the rest of it. But what do? Do you cut yourself off from those communities and starve them, or do you actually try and make a fair share of the riches and the economy to all parts of the community, instead of just the rich?
I think there has to be a more concerted effort to tie in a more positive version of national politics into this European idealized sort of version of regional politics as a whole. And I think that so far it's been hard for countries to navigate that path. So I hope that within the next couple of years, leaders can better understand what exactly it means to tread both national politics and regional continental politics.
With everything was happening now in Europe and the feeling that Europe is just there to take money and to bring laws who are not quite easy to respect, if it doesn't change, in my opinion, Europe will explode, because taking decision with 28 countries, it's nearly totally impossible. So we need to change things, and we really need to make the people understand that Europe is a good thing for them, but it is a job of Europe first.
To what extent does the economic instability in the EU affect the potential future of the European Union? We turn to our experts for their perspective.
At the moment, the EU is having member states are having severe economic problems, largely because of the single currency. So where particular EU states in difficulties can't adjust interest rates, that's causing them real problems. In the longer term, that kind of transitional issue will ease. Remember that in the United States, for example, there were no less than 3 attempts to have a uniform currency, in other words, the US dollar, in the 19th century. So it took a lot of pain and a lot of effort to establish a single currency in the US. The EU is going through similar pain at the moment, but it's highly likely that in the medium to long term, there'll be a positive result, largely because of the decision of the essentially the German banking system and the European Reserve Bank to back the euro. So it's worth the short-term pain for the long-term gain.
Here we can talk about the economy and we can talk about the future of the EU. The EU is a great establishment which meant initially to prevent the possibilities of having wars amongst the European countries, especially say France and Germany, to start with. So this union had mainly or initially a political aim which was great, and we are enjoying its benefits until now. When it comes to its economic benefits, I think every single leader, even anti-European leaders, they admit to the fact that the European Union is beneficiary to the economies of all those countries in one way or degree or another. So the European Union is a good thing, and it was born a giant. So it's not going to go, even if, God forbid, a third world war takes place. I think it will stay, it will remain, and even if it is frozen for a while, it will come back. This is a great project which I find eternal, and I wish it to remain that way.
Politicians, analysts and the media were shocked by the big rise in anti-EU voters. But why are so many people unhappy with the European Union? We asked them. Politicians, analysts and some members of the media were surprised at the sheer scale of the anti-EU vote across Europe. Why are so many people unhappy with the EU?
Again, it's the economy and money in people's pockets. If people were better off, they wouldn't be bothered about the right wing. But again, people think the right wing and the UKIP and people are going to make a big difference to their general well-being and general wealth. But I really don't believe so. I don't know where it's going to end, but it doesn't look good.
I think one of the reasons is that they feel more than ever that politicians are disconnected with what's happening to normal people outside big cities who have a normal job and normal life. I think it's a really good move from extremist party to say people. To understand these people, and I think mainstream parties don't always get what's happening, in normal people's life.
I'm not sure. It's just Scotland wants to be independent. People say let them be independent. There's too many foreign nationals coming to our country, I think, and just pinching our jobs. That's just my views. I think they're all unhappy because of the way the gates have opened. It's been flooded.
The economy. Here's money. It just, everybody's being pinched. Every day things seem to be getting worse, or new countries seem to be falling into crisis, and it's just causing, I think, everybody to feel just unsettled, discomforted, and a bit concerned about what the future holds for them.
Well, I think they blame a lot of the instability that they're experiencing in their economy on European Union, when in fact they should be holding their local governments to account and asking for a much bigger voice in how things are happening. Maybe it's easier for their governments to blame the European Union for certain fiscal policies, but actually they should be taking more control of what's going on.
So that's the view of the public. We gave our experts the last word on whether there was a clear driver behind this massive increase in the anti-EU vote. Here's what they said.
The key reason boils down to economic insecurity. So where people feel their livelihood and their jobs are at risk, there's a temptation to project those feelings of insecurity onto political institutions. And the most obvious scapegoat is the European Union. So that's quite a lot of the reason for the votes for far right or far left anti-EU parties. Other reasons really might resolve around more straightforward issues about lack of democracy within European institutions and a disenchantment with other aspects of European political institutions. But the main reasons appear to be economic. The EU appears to be more unpopular now than at any point since its formation, and that's no coincidence that has come around at a time when Europe's under more economic pressure than ever before since the advent of the EU.
The people are fed up with the system itself. Politically, there is no true democracy. In the world, we have elected dictatorship and absolute dictatorship. But democracy, it doesn't really exist. Economically, we can see the international establishment, or say the great players of the world economy, the holders of the blocks of capital. These people are more interested in profit, globalization, openly protecting monopoly and corruption. So that is really unfair. And when people suffer economically and they can't make ends meet, of course they will have to protest. The trouble is there is no real alternative for the people of Europe and the world, because there is no real people's party, whether right-wing economically or left-wing economically. Any party, whatever its philosophy, should be representing the people, and that does not exist anywhere in the world. So people have to protest.
The European elections were not just a revolt by British electors against the EU. It was part of a rebellion by millions of electors across the whole of the European Union against the project itself and the parties in charge of it. So the British electorate may have felt that they were speaking out and different, but in fact they were reflecting a common movement. That throws the present of the European Union into uncertainty, and its future, certainly as far as the electorate are concerned, very much into doubt.